Well, last year sucked. I mean, outside the pandemic, the celebrity deaths, and pretty much everything else, this was a pretty miserable time for movies. Not only have the big movies we've been anticipating for so long been mostly delayed to this year, for now, the few movies that actually came out kinda sucked this year. Now, it's not to say that there haven't been any good movies that came out this year, but these movies left so much to be desired. So I'm here to do what I'm sure nobody online has ever thought of and list out the 10 worst movies of 2020, or at least of what I've seen. Now this isn't like some deep analysis of these movies, nor are they reviews. But some of them I've already talked about in the Film Boy podcast or at my friend Nick Caneo's channel, and all of them I did short reviews on my Letterboxd account. So if you want to know what movies I've seen this year, as well as some movies I just feel like logging in, go over to those links down below. So for every top 10 list, there are a few honorable mentions, or in this case dishonorable mentions, that just missed the cut, but are still worth glossing over. The SpongeBob movie, Sponge on the Run, an hour-and-a-half long camcorder commercial that tries to justify its existence with a cliched and predictable plot. The Keanu cameo was okay though. Hillbilly Elegy. What do you get when you turn the Beverly Hillbillies into an Oscar bait film? You get possibly Ron Howard's worst movie. I'm thinking of Ending Things. Probably the most disappointing, overrated, pretentious, and uneventful film on this list. Bloodshot. Oh, look at me, I'm Vin Diesel. I have this super tragic backstory about losing my wife that this organization keeps screwing over just as an excuse for cheap-ass action scenes. Whatever, man. Monster Hunter. I guess ruining the Resident Evil games wasn't enough for Paul W.S. Anderson, so he just decided to ruin another beloved franchise. And the New Mutants. Man, you thought Dark Phoenix was a poor way to end the franchise? Let's just be glad that the X-Men are back at home at Marvel so that they can finally do them justice. Eventually. And to think that there are 10 movies worse than those years, huh? Well, just you find out.
Any other objections? Good. Well, let the fun begin.
Remaking the Hitchcock classic and a Best Picture winner? That's a double whammy right there, and that's Rebecca. This movie had a lot of potential, it really did. If this was more faithful to the original novel like it claims to be, then I would justify its existence. But instead, it replaced suspense and intrigue with a boring romance and scares that just turn it into a cheesy horror film. Which is the complete opposite of what Hitchcock was. Now, a movie that commentates on the effects of social media on young children can be an interesting dive, but the Cuties just weren't sure would be the compliment of the decade. Now, some of you may have expected this to be way high on my list, but no, I didn't despise this movie like 99% of the population, because it did have some potential. However, if you look at the directing, the characters, the story arcs the characters go through, and you just wonder how they even got away with it. The story ruined childhood innocence. Is that not enough to say at this point? Zoink, Scoob! I could never imagine our movie being this bad! Scoob is the epitome of what happens when the makers of this movie wanted to make this as little Scooby-Doo as possible, and instead have this Captain Falcon superhero and Indiana Jones Adventures cinematic universe wannabe hybrid that's more disjointed than anything, and they probably could have gotten away with it if it weren't for those meddling dabbing jokes. I don't know who's the worst character of 2020, but the wrong Missy herself is up there. Lauren Lipkiss in this movie has got to be the most obnoxious girlfriend one could ever ask for. Seriously, you'd probably rather go on a blind date with Glenn Close from Fatal Attraction than spend a second with this bimbo in your life. Oh, and the movie itself is just typical unfunny Happy Madison schlock. Why are these movies so popular on Netflix again? Chronicle was lightning in a bottle for Josh Trank, then Fan Forster came and shared that bottle, and now this movie came along and turned that bottle back to sand. I mean, what was Capone? It was the story about Al Capone during his final days of living, sit around mumbling to the point of incomprehension, also crapping his guts out in at least 2 occurrences. This movie could have worked, it really could have. If only the script was good. Robert Downey Jr. gave us the swan song for the character of Iron Man back in 2019. And the first thing he did after that was, for lack of a better term, do little to impress. Doolittle is another thing about this doctor who can talk to animals, which had moderate success with the Eddie Murphy movies, which begs the question why they needed to make this. Especially when it has terrible effects, horrendous jokes, and a climax so bad it just has to be seen to be believed. Hope luck comes back to you, Downey. I can't imagine your career being worse than this. Why is Fantasy Island a thing? Why the need to turn it into a generic horror movie? Why are the characters so bland? Why is Michael Pena in this? Why did Blumhouse make two great horror movies, The Hunt and The Invisible Man, and yet release this in the same year? Those are another good questions that may never be answered. Because this movie doesn't deserve to have them answered. Making a movie about the pandemic seems like a novel concept. At least it was until I saw Michael Bay's Songbird. And while Songbird wasn't exactly directed by him, it sure has its fingerprints, with poorly shot action, actors who act nothing like they should, and a supposed message that's more preachy than anything. It's no wonder why they call this more tasteless than the virus itself. Well, what could a top 10 list of worst movies post-2014 without one of those movies? The movies that try so hard to be sexy but just aren't. First is 50 Shades movies, then 365 Days, now After We Collided. After a terrible first movie, things couldn't get any worse, right? Apparently so, because the characters are even more unlikable than they ever were. The sex was even less sexy than it ever was, and the drama is even more phoned in than it ever was. I mean, you know it's bad when the fanfictions I write on my DeviantArt page are catching the rank compared to those movies. Oh, you thought After We Collided was gonna be number one? You thought Cuties was gonna be number one? Oh no. Number one is a movie that is so baffling, so laughable, so bad, you wouldn't even believe it. You've all probably heard about the backlash it's gotten from fans and critics alike, and it's, of course, Artemis Fowl. Holy! To say that this is the last Airbender of a new generation would be the understatement of the century. How do you condense two entire books into an hour and a half and expect something salvageable? I haven't exactly read Artemis Fowl, but for what I've heard, it's nothing like it. Which barely even matters anyway, because look at all the other aspects. The acting's atrocious, the writing's just the bare minimum, the effects are obnoxious. I mean, I can't look at this movie without thinking of that scene where Josh Gad digs into the ground and craps out dirt while he drills down there. If that's not a metaphor for this movie, I don't know what is. And seeing such talent as Judi Dench, Josh Gad, director Kenneth Branagh attest to this, it's just further proof that they just wanted to quit paycheck. For those who say that Disney's live-action remakes are the bottom of the barrel, allow me to point you to this. Artemis Fowl, perhaps the worst Disney movie of all time, or at least of recent memory, and the worst movie of 2020. Phew. Well, this was a shit show. Hopefully I'll make up for it when I do a top 10 best films of 2020. That is, when I actually feel like doing it.